let's give you an update now on what is reported to be fresh fighting that has resumed in Gaza this morning as the 7-day truce between Israel and Hamas expires. Explosions and gunfire reported shortly before the ceasefire came to an end, with Israel accusing Hamas of violating the truce. Well, this comes less than a day after 8 more Israeli hostages were freed from Gaza in exchange for the release of 30 Palestinian prisoners. The international pressure continues to mount for a longer truce. However, both sides have yet to announce a deal to extend it. All right, let's try and get the latest now, and we'll speak to Gift of the Givers project manager in the city of Ramallah. This is in the occupied West Bank, Hanin Barghouti. Hanin, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Talk to us about the reaction to what seems to be renewed fighting. Do we know this as a fact now, that fighting has resumed?
Good morning to you too. So what's happening since 3 hours now that the truce has ended between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Israelis are accusing the Palestinians of violating the truce, and the Palestinians are accusing the Israelis of violating the truce. But what we are noticing in these past 3 hours that the Israelis are intensely bombing all areas of Gaza Strip. Up until now, we have 32 Palestinians were murdered, were killed in these 3 hours. Only 3 hours have passed, and we have 32 Palestinians until now, and there are still people under the rubble because the Israelis have been bombing houses in these 3 hours. They bombed houses in the south of Gaza, and they also bombed houses and residential apartments in the north of Gaza. So, the war has resumed after 7 days of the truce that have caused of the release of 240 Palestinian women and children who were imprisoned in the Israeli jails to almost 100 Israelis that were hostages in Gaza. But in these past 3 hours, we have the fighting is really intense. The Israelis' bombardment and missiles are really intense in all areas of Gaza that caused the killing of 32 Palestinians. So the situation is getting really bad, and the people are freaking out because of this intense 3 hours that have just passed.
Well, let's talk about what you describe as people freaking out, and that is to be expected. It's reaction from people who would have thought that this truce would potentially become a permanent ceasefire. The reaction to that, and add to it the work that you do as humanitarian organizations. How does this impact on the work that you have been doing for the last 7 days? People were hoping, people has high hopes that this truce will be extended. Yesterday, there were rumors that this truce will be extended for a full week, and people were hoping that this truce will lead to a complete ceasefire. So because yesterday when the truce got extended for 1 day, this decision was taken at the final hour of the truce. So people until this morning were hoping that the truce will be extended. But at 7 o'clock, people were shocked with the heavy bombs that were thrown at them by the Israeli airstrikes and warplanes. So all of a sudden, at the 7 a.m. today, a lot of heavy bombardment where all of a sudden has started. So people that had the high hopes that this truce will be extended were faced with high numbers of injuries and high numbers of people got killed by this heavy bombardment. So people are freaking out. People are in a very bad humanitarian situation. Even through these 1 week of truce, people were not able to get their sufficient essential needs. People were suffering to get fuel. People were suffering to get cooking gas. People were suffering to get the needed food and canned food and water for their families. And of course, the number of the aid trucks that were allowed to Gaza in this week were not enough to cover only a part of the actual needs. Over 1,000 of these trucks were allowed, but in order to cover the essential needs of the people, we need like 1,000 of these trucks to be in daily. So yeah, this truce, yes, the people had time to take a breath, but it was not enough for them to get all the essential needs that they want. And for us as a humanitarian organization, our work did not stop during the war and even during the truce. We were doing our best to provide people with whatever we can. We have provided the injured people with medical kits. We have provided the injured people with air mattresses. We have provided food parcels for the displaced families, and we are still implementing our work. Of course, working during such circumstances is really hard, especially that not all the supplies are, it's really hard for us to find all the needed supplies, but our teams are doing their best. We are reaching out for all our partners, for all the warehouses that we can reach to and we can get supplies from, and our work did not stop for a minute. We are distributing at this moment medical supplies for the hospitals, the European Hospital and Nasser complex. We are trying our best to help the people, but as I said, the humanitarian situation did not get better during this truce because people are facing a starvation. People are in desperate need of all life essentials. So we are doing our best, and people are trying their best to provide their families, but the situation is catastrophic and disastrous.
Hanin, as we conclude our conversation, I know that this may not be your area of expertise, but what do we know at this stage about that prisoner exchange? So this would be Palestinians who had been jailed in Israeli prisons versus the hostages that were being held by Hamas. Do we know where the numbers stand at this stage?
So as I said, in this past week, in this truce, the number that were released from the Palestinians were 240, and for the Israelis it was above 100 hostages were freed from Gaza. But as the essential or the initial information that were out by the news right now, that what broke the truce, that the Israelis want their hostages, all of their hostages in Gaza, to be freed with nothing in return. They don't want to free all the Palestinian prisoners, and Hamas is insisting that in order for us to free all the Israelis hostages in Gaza, all the prisons in Israel, all the Palestinian prisoners has to be freed. So it's from the both sides. Both sides want their prisoners to be out, and of course the Palestinian prisoners have been. There are a high number of the Palestinian prisoners that have been in the Israeli prisons for years. We know prisoners who have been in the Israeli prisons for above 40 years. They have been imprisoned for 40 years and plus 40 years, and people are sentenced to lifetime in prison. So of course, Hamas is insisting in order to free the Israeli prisoners or the Israeli hostages, these prisoners that have been in prison for 40 and 30 and 20 years has to be also freed because in order for this to be a fair deal, all the Palestinians has to be freed for the Israelis to be freed, because even the whole world was not given attention. We're making a blind eye on the Palestinian prisoners that are now facing a horrific and catastrophic conditions. Since before even the 7th of October, the conditions of the Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jails were really hard, and after the 7th of October, the conditions were way worse. The Israelis are preventing them from food, from water. They are beating them. They are attacking them. I guess we all saw the conditions. You can compare the conditions between the Israeli hostages that were freed from Gaza in comparison to the Palestinians that were freed from the Israeli prisons. The Palestinians were in a very bad conditions. They have broken ribs, they have broken hands, and even the kids that were freed were abused. So the situation of the Palestinians in the Israeli prisons is really hard. And in order for this deal to be agreed to, all the Palestinian prisoners have to be freed in order for the Israelis to be freed. That's where this exchange is standing. All we know from the news that both parties, the Israelis and Hamas, are insisting of all of their prisoners to be freed. But we don't have any other information up till now.
Hanin Barghouti, let me thank you very much for this update. She is the project manager with the humanitarian organization Gift of the Givers, talking to us from the occupied West Bank in the city of Ramallah there.